1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you got it. Well, you got it.
Hello, my name is Debbi Miller, and I am the Manager of Communications and Public Engagement, and I'm going to tell you more about public engagement.
From last year's YGK Music, that was the Meringues with the track Tell Me Twice. Find this track and many more at cityofkingston.ca/YGK Music. Welcome to Tell Me More, the City of Kingston Podcast. I'm Rob Hosier, your host and a communications officer here at the city. I'm joined in our slick production room, well, it's more or less a meeting room with tabletop mics, but by our producer, Paul Whittingham. Say hello, Paul.
Hello.
And finally, behind the scenes is communications officer, editor, and journalist at large, Julie Lee Stitt. If you're new to this podcast and happen to like what you hear, why not go back and give it a listen to some of our earlier episodes. You'll find conversations we've had with city superstars like our Chief Financial Officer, Desiree Kennedy, Director of Heritage Services, Jen Campbell, and the one and only Miss Paige Agnew, who talks about the ever-scandalous topic of zoning bylaws. We even snuck the mayor in for an episode. But first, listen to today's episode. Of course, as always, it's a good one. Today we're going to dive into public engagement. Here to engage with us is Debbi Miller, who you heard from the top of the episode. Debbi is the Manager of Communications and Public Engagement, and she has been part of the small core team that's helped refine how the city engages with you, our residents. Debbi joined the city in 2014, and at that time, City Council had identified one of its key priorities would be to foster an open and transparent government. At the time, Debbi was a communications officer and relatively new to the City of Kingston, both the workplace and the community. But she was also, at that time, the only IAP2, the International Association of Public Engagement, trained individual. And so she jumped into the process. Over the years, she has seen public engagement grow, improve, and become part of our local culture. She's also become my source for all Kingston recommendations. Now, you might not know this, but Debbi has helped transform how we engage with you, our residents, but in the past 7 years, she's also become one of Kingston's finest, most informed, and trusted cheerleaders, and that comes in all shapes and forms. Want to know where to get the best focaccia? Ask Debbi. Looking for a sweet date night spot? Ask Debbi. Need new shoes? That's right, ask Debbi. But here to tell us more about those early days, key successes, and the future of public engagement at the city is Miss Miller. Debbi, welcome back to the mic, and thank you for joining us today.
So tell me you'll take me home tonight. And tell me where you've been all my life. Nothing you say feels right.
Okay, Debbi, I'm sorry for the boring question to start, but let's blame it on the writing staff. But what exactly is public engagement? Is what we're doing right now public engagement? Is a tweet public engagement? Is going out and yelling in the street public engagement if other people can hear me? I'm asking for a friend.
Great question and great way to start off this conversation. Public engagement, really, we've defined it within our framework. So just sort of touching on the definitions that we've defined, the way we define it with the city is the process by which residents are informed on or given the opportunity to be involved in city decisions that impact all or part of the community. So it could be any number of these things could be included in that for sure. So those are all pieces that I would say there's ways, we've got definite methods that we use for public engagement and ways that we channel people so that the feedback can be incorporated into certain areas. But I know that these are all ways that people consider public engagement for sure.
Absolutely, and they might be some of the more visible ways that people see public engagement and things. So what you're saying is these are tactics, perhaps, in a public engagement campaign. I personally have not tried the yelling in the street tactic yet, but we'll see how things go. But I've personally seen, how hugely important public engagement is through, my work with Housing and Social Services, for example, as that group's communications officer. But playing devil's advocate, why should a city engage with the community? Shouldn't staff and council have all the answers? These are our elected officials. These are the people hired to do these things. Shouldn't they have the answers?
Very good question. And I think we all live, work, and play in this community, and we love what we do. We all participate in so many different things in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important to hear from the people that are, interacting with a park or participating on a trail or going out to enjoy a rec facility or any facility for that matter. But it's really important to hear from those people that interact with them every day. So that's a huge part of why we want to engage with the public. stepping back a little bit to think about how we got here and how we have this consistent approach to public engagement with our public engagement framework. I keep saying that word public engagement. I'm really reinforcing it there, but really talking about that piece and stepping back to how this started and the open government piece that was within the council priorities and setting out to ask staff, ask council, ask the public what they wanted in a public engagement framework. Going back to 2017, there was 4 iterations of a draft framework that were developed.
Wow.
And each iteration went to council, staff, and residents to receive input. We went through multiple methods. We had focus groups, we had surveys, open houses. There was reports that went to council. We sat down and met with people one-on-one just to get a better understanding for what people really wanted to include in that framework. There was a lot of legwork. And I'll tell you up front, we didn't get it right off the top. We heard that very loud and clear, and we said, okay, we're taking it back. We're going to try again.
Yeah.
And we tried again 4 times. And then when we finally were at the third one, the third iteration, we started to hear, I think we're there. But how do we put the wheels on this? How do we change the culture for public engagement in the city, in the organization? So everybody was asking this question. So I went to work and I started to put together the implementation plan. So I call the implementation plan the wheels on the bus. So that was basically my marching orders, or per se, for the next 2 years. And it was mapped out that I had timelines to meet for each of the objectives within that for the next 2 years. It talked about training. It talked about how do we communicate, what are the tools we're using, things like that. And walked through all of those pieces, made sure to meet the timelines that were there. We reported back to council annually with the timelines that were there, and just made sure that we were receiving input as we went. Like if people had comments about the site that we went with, the platform, so the Get Involved Kingston site that went live the day after the report went to council as well. So all of those pieces were so critical in the cultural shift for the organization and for the community.
And so basically you were tasked with answering that question.
Absolutely.
If we have elected officials and we have city staff, what's the value of public engagement?
Absolutely.
And you're not only expressing that through creating the framework, which was engaged on to create an engagement framework, which gets kind of meta if you start going down this rabbit hole a little bit, but you engaged on that and 4 times you got it right. You got it to the closest part of it being perfect. And now we also, for the last few years, have had to show the value of public engagement through practice. And that word you use, consistent, is such a key word with that, because not only do you have to say this is important, but you also have to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Absolutely. The consistency piece is critical. It's not that prior to the public engagement framework, public engagement wasn't taking place.
Yeah.
Departments were doing it across the organization, but not consistently. So what was that expectation from the public? They didn't know when a certain group was going to come out. Everything wasn't found in the same spot. So by doing things consistently, putting the Bang the Table site through the Get Involved Kingston platform in place, everything is found in one spot now. You can go in and you can see what projects are live. You can sign up and receive the emails that come into your inbox. You can then see where a project's at. Is it in the early stages? Have they made decisions on it already and it's in the later stages? Or is it going to council shortly for a decision to be made? So you can track a project, you can jump in and out, but you can also really be aware of what you want to be involved in our community. And it's so important that you're involved.
And it's in naming all those that, especially the Get Involved platform, the Bang the Table platform, is there's never been better access in some respects, where you have almost a dashboard of projects going on in the city, whereas 10 years ago, or even as technology has changed, you didn't have that visibility. You'd have to read through council notes or something like that. But now you have this, smorgasbord per se of public engagement opportunities and a way to have your voice, said in the community. So you mentioned too, the work behind the scenes to make this accessible, to make this widespread, to make this consistent and impactful, and all these things. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes.
There absolutely is a lot of work that goes behind the scenes. And the communications and public engagement team that I have the privilege of working with every day, of this incredible group of individuals, I honestly, they are the thread that creates that consistency across the organization, working with all the departments. They're the ones who, work on the Get Involved Kingston site to make sure things are consistent. They're the ones who review the surveys and send out the news releases and things like that, just to make sure that we are being consistent, making sure that everybody has, on every engagement opportunity, there's 2 weeks notice, that every engagement opportunity where possible, we're open for 3 weeks for engagement at minimum.
Sure.
So those are all really critical pieces, and all of that work coming together, but also making sure we're communicating about it in a consistent fashion and that everybody knows about it. So critical. Like, those are all such important pieces. And just, as we think about the online platform, that was definitely a piece that we heard from the public. They wanted a space they could go and see everything that was happening, or that they could provide input if they didn't want to go to an open house or something in person. People work different hours, and there's so much happening in people's lives that, maybe somebody wants to provide input at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning because they can't go to something else and they want to read up on it. Or maybe their comfort level too is being able to submit some comments and questions rather than having to stand up, and voice a comment in front of people.
That's huge. That's huge, because it's one thing to give your input, but it's one thing to give your input in front of an audience. And so, by having that input come in a safe and welcoming way, and there's another consideration of the engagement you have to think of along the access line of the thing too. To get the true amount of engagement from our community, we have to look at those different means that could be online means.
Absolutely. There's so many pieces to it that need to be considered. And when something comes up and there's a question asked about a process, our team is quick to be able to respond to why we've done something that way, but also take into consideration, why did we do it that way? And is there a different way we could do it? Is there something we missed? Is there something that we can consider? Is there an opportunity to get to other groups? How do we get to other groups? And that's always something that we are always asking ourselves across the organization.
Right.
Every department is asking themselves, how do we get to all the right audiences as we go out and engage on everything? So critical.
That's a learning process as well.
Absolutely.
You say about having 4 iterations of the framework itself, but we're also, as we practice, things are changing. We're definitely going to talk about some major changes in society coming up later in the podcast, but there's all these ways that this thing has to evolve, and it can't be just this one process that just stays static and it doesn't change at all. And we've talked about a lot of the ins and outs of it, and how seriously the staff take it, and how on all levels within the city, because it's so essential to our work. But can you give me a few examples, making this ultra practical now, where you've seen the power and importance of public engagement, where you've seen that public input really make a change, really make a impact upon a project, an initiative, or anything like that?
Absolutely. There's so many examples that I think about, and just looking at some of the examples that happen in neighborhoods, especially, because that's something that people interact with on a daily basis. So looking at the parks and planning for a park is so incredible. Like when they're, this is pre-COVID, but again, at some point, hopefully we can begin moving back to meeting people in places where the engagement is happening about the park.
Oh yeah, you're here. Like you can point to stuff as you're having the engagement. Yeah, makes it a little bit more real than a diagram.
Absolutely, and you can walk around and say, okay, now I understand why we're considering this for this space, rather than, these are some of the ideas I had, but also understanding too some of the requirements and the scope of the engagement is so critical for everybody participating to understand, because the direction that staff are given, they're following a scope, for the engagement, and they're saying, okay, so just for an example, with this park, we're going to engage on the equipment and we're going to engage on this, but we know as staff that we need to put in, X, Y, and Z that need to be incorporated into a park. So that's already part of the budget consideration. So we have this much to play with and this much to go over and above. But there's so many pieces, like I think about that, or some of the facilities that have been built and considerations within those facilities, and what do we want to see within those spaces, or, the bike lanes and the active transportation models.
Huge, sure.
Absolutely. And our planning bylaws and things like that. Like the official plan was the very first project that I worked on when I came to the city. city from as a communications officer. And just that project went on for a long time, and the official plan impacts everybody in the city. So just the importance of all of these policies and procedures and bylaws that we interact with daily, but helping the public to understand the importance of it in their daily life too.
And it makes it in such a palatable way too, because it summarizes the information pretty succinctly when you engage in an engagement. Like you go to the Get Involved page and you want to look at X engagement, you're going to have a nice summary of what they're, some key dates and things like that. You try to make it as visibly good as possible that you can just consume that information. So you're not going through, whole web pages of material. You're not going through, it's all in like one spot. So even if you don't decide to engage on the project, but I don't see why you wouldn't, but if you didn't, you could just learn about the project so easily there and be notified, of all these cool things that are happening within the community, correct?
Absolutely. And that's one of the really brilliant things I like about the Get Involved Kingston site is it is one place. Every project that has ever been active on that site is still there. It still has a shelf life there, so you can see what the final decision was. Here's the report that went to council. But the only part that we talk about on that site is the engagement portion of it. So we don't talk about all of the detail and the weeds of the project. We have links to it. There might be videos for background. There might be report links and things like that. So if you want to dig in and find more, but it's really about what are we engaging on? When do you need to really step up and pay attention and provide input? Or when are staff doing the legwork and compiling content for it or getting ready to do other things with it? So also sign up. You can sign up. We have, very excited to say, we're almost at 12,000 activated participants on that site.
That deserves a Paige Agnew whoop whoop. There you go.
Yeah, so
we're gonna have a sound effect for that before long, Paul. You want to work on that?
Absolutely. So when we first started on this site and putting it together, and there was a conversation around, do we require people to register to provide input?
Right.
So, it's not so much to register to provide input. What we're asking is for people to register so that they can sign up for the platform so that we can communicate with you moving forward.
Right.
So when there's a new project that's gone live on the site, you'll get an email in your inbox. We don't do it every project. We do it on a weekly basis. So if 3 projects launch in a week, you'll get 1 email. So don't be concerned with overload of the inbox. And we try to also incorporate times where there is an open house or a virtual engagement that's happening, or if there is reporting back that we can share with you. Those things are all part of the wrap-up newsletters. So happy to say we're almost at 12,000 activated participants, which is
huge.
A really fantastic number for
That's
sure.
Huge.
For sure.
Yeah, because you approach public engagement like you have to, if that's practice, to say you want to limit the barriers as much as possible. You want as little clicks, as little things that the individual needs to do to provide their input. However, that's a critical step. And, and it really creates a community per se of engagers as well that is a powerful, powerful voice. And that notification system, oh my gosh, even as a city employee, you miss the different things going on in other departments and things, but you get that email going, oh yeah, that's happening. I want to really kind of take a peek at that, whatever. So overall, parks was public engagement has been a huge game changer in that. You've listed quite a few things on there too. And we also talked about live public engagements, but this thing called COVID came along, COVID-19, and this happy band of public engagement professionals just going along, doing a lot of live engagements and things like that. But suddenly we had to do things drastically differently. It shook things up for everyone, regarding society, but also including public engagement. Can you tell me how engagement was changed? If you had a crystal ball, I'd also love your forecast of where it might be headed.
Absolutely. So we were chugging along on the second implementation plan.
Okay.
We had literally the second implementation plan because we finished the first one in December 2019. We took the second implementation plan to council in December 2019. So we're just starting on that. And in March 2020, as everybody knows, COVID hit. And then everything was paused. So we paused all engagement at that time. Everybody was all hands on deck working on COVID and what were we adapting and adjusting to.
Absolutely.
There was so many changes as everybody, that seems like a lifetime ago.
It does.
But it was like 2 years ago almost now, but we stopped everything for a period of time, but we knew that we needed to go out to the community and talk to them and ask them how they felt and if they were ready to continue to engage, like how they were feeling. So we did. In May of 2020, we went out to the public and asked how people were feeling. We asked a few questions. Would you consider virtual engagement? And we heard back from the community, and absolutely, they wanted to continue to engage.
Such an important first question.
Absolutely.
It's such an important first question because, as a municipality, you can say, okay, well, we're ready to go, and we can look at the analytics and do everything like that too. But we actually thoughtfully asked the question saying, hey, do you guys want to talk about this?
That's right.
You want to start down this road again of really engaging. And it was so cool to see that, yep.
Absolutely, they did. And then it was, how do we do this? And how do we consider everybody when we do this? It's not just, we're not going to be having in-person sessions for a while, but how do we continue that? We had the benefit of having our Get Involved Kingston site already live, which was huge. Yeah. I just have to say, we already had people following there, and we already had that infrastructure in place. So thankfully, we were able to continue with that. But we took a report to council in July of 2020, and that report talked about the virtual component. So how do we take meetings online? How do we be consistent with this approach? And there was so many pieces to consider. So we researched the platform, and we researched the tools. We use Mentimeter now as our add-on with Zoom for the virtual sessions. We set up the training for staff, so there was like a template around the training around that. We also really said, but we can't just think about the virtual side. What if somebody isn't online and they still want to complete a survey or participate in something?
Absolutely.
So we talked about what does that look like? And we set up that people can either sign up to receive surveys when they go online. They would actually be mailed to your home. So you can still sign up for that. And you call in to the contact center, and they will sign, or the customer experience team, and they'll sign you up for that. And they'll sign you up for that. So you'll receive those automatically.
Sure.
Or if you just want to do it one-off and you hear of something and you want to provide feedback, you can call in, and the customer experience team will complete the survey with you over the phone. There's always the option of reaching out directly to the subject matter expert who is listed on each project page. So if you're not online and don't know who that person is, by all means, again, reach out to the customer experience team.
100%.
And they'd be happy to help you navigate that and put you in touch with the right person. So those are all critical pieces that needed to be considered. The other part, too, that we talked about as every virtual engagement was happening, they would all be live closed caption, live recorded, so that they're posted immediately online. We share them on social, so you can sign up to join. You can also call in to join them. So there's lots of options with that. We've had a couple of smaller invited engagements that are in person, where it was a tour or something like that. But generally, that's the way we've been navigating it at this point. Staff are definitely watching what's happening across the country and in touch with a group of public engagement professionals to see what others are doing. And everybody is looking at what is the hybrid model now? What does that look like? So are we going to have a mix of both? My crystal ball doesn't
it's looking fuzzy.
It still is a little bit fuzzy, but I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think the hybrid model is definitely probably the path that I see us going down, because there is a benefit. People enjoy being able to engage online. There's people who still want to engage in person, though. So it's how do we consider both of those, but also considering the level of work, and we can't duplicate them and have them at different times, but how do we bring them together? So those are all big considerations that are in the works for sure.
And you're talking too about bringing something into an online platform, a live platform that isn't just, we're having a meeting, we're going to talk, and it's very informal. This is public record.
That's right.
So these are considerations you have to make when you're going to say, hey, we're going to broadcast. Obviously, they did that with council when they decided to do council online by Zoom because of COVID-19. But in this in particular, too, you have to make that consideration. But then we also talk about, now that things are hopefully starting to settle down and we got to start doing some in-person engagements, the value of the online engagement and how people are maybe more comfortable in that, or maybe have learned over the last 2 years that this is a very comfortable means to do that. And we talked about the value of that earlier, that this almost needs to continue.
Absolutely. And I know that within the communications and public engagement team, that's a conversation that we have quite regularly. And what does this look like? And we're always asking questions of others like, what are you doing differently now? And how would you change something? And what do we need to be looking at from a resource perspective and things like that? So definitely considerations for sure. And how do we move into that hybrid model? So continuing with the Get Involved Kingston site for sure. And then just what are those additional considerations? So.
How are you seeing the response from other communities? Are they kind of in the same space as we are right now? Are they considering the hybrid model? Is there someone that's really progressive with this at this point?
I think there's definitely a combination of probably all of the above. There's definitely a lot of municipalities that reach out and ask what we're doing, wanting to see that. A lot of them watched the model that we had put in place. There was others that had that in place as well. So definitely watching and saying, okay, how do we move back to this? We all need to be safe. We all need to be comfortable. And we also need to make sure, staff are safe and comfortable when they're going out to invite people into a space from COVID. But also that the community feels comfortable and safe as well when they're coming into a space. So there's different considerations and different ways that people are doing things across the country. So
sometimes it takes some creative thinking because we're also looking at engagements along the lines or through the lens of EDI as well, of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and to make our engagements as inclusive and as accessible as possible. There's a lot of logistics that could happen in the background. One example I can think of at the top of my head is that we've been doing some engagements with housing and social services, and obviously you want as many people with lived experience as possible, but that posed a problem going online. And so we were able to facilitate an iPad system with advocate groups and be able to kind of facilitate that input. Essentially is what you're doing, facilitating that input in a space, and that the individual feels safe and included in the process. And so that is another layer that we're throwing on here that really educates the hybrid model or our overall approach.
Absolutely. And all of those considerations across every project are so critical in making sure that we're considering the audience we need to get to, and are there any barriers? Are there any things we need to consider on how we get to these groups? So yeah, the work you're doing with housing and social services is incredible. So kudos to you and that team.
As I blush and turn away, we could talk about public engagement all day, but talking about barriers, and we actually have talked about public engagement all day on many occasions, but speaking about barriers, what do you say to people who aren't interested in getting involved?
Absolutely. It's really important to understand that we all contribute to the city that we live, work, and play in. And I really think there may not be a project that's online right now or that's active right now for engagement that you're interested in, but keep an eye out, because we all can provide great feedback. We all bring a different experience to the table. And I think it's so critical that you get involved in the community that you live in. You may not see, or you may not agree with the final decision on something, but providing your feedback into it so that others understand where you're coming from, the emotion behind it, is so critical as we talk about public engagement all the time, because if you don't come to the table, that will never be considered.
Absolutely. And a part of public record, essentially. That data is collected, that's part of public record, and your input is definitely received, processed, and input into the planning. But when you possibly just post something on social media around something like that, definitely there are passionate people out there that have an opinion and have every right to express that opinion. And definitely it's understood, and it's definitely it's seen by those involved, but it's not recorded in the project. It's not definitely involved in that particular piece. It's not really focused on that particular input model. So, it's you can do it, and you can do it in conjunction. But we just really encourage you to not only do that, but also maybe sign up for public engagement and put that passion and put that opinion right into the project itself.
100%. And so often I know people comment on social or they comment on other platforms, but really make sure, and we try to redirect from social into the Get Involved Kingston platform or to the subject matter expert, depending on the scenario, depending on the situation, or make people aware if there's a virtual session coming up or something like that, but trying to put it into the place where the feedback is being compiled.
It's not, we're not deflecting it.
No,
it's
not
fine
at
that you've
all.
said this, but we
That's
really
right.
want to get it recorded. And
That's
a lot
right.
of times too, they're really passionate and they're very insightful, in a lot of ways too. So we want to make sure that gets involved in the process too. So let's suppose, a little bit of role playing here, you just persuaded a whole bunch of folks to find out what the city is working on and how they can contribute. What is their next step?
Whoa. There's so many pieces there. So one of the big things within the implementation plan that went to council, and it's a new implementation plan went to council last fall around COVID considerations, and it included virtual engagement, but it paused a few things that were in the second iteration of the implementation plan, and those included the larger in-person events. So what we were trying to focus on was bringing people to a space, so kind of a trade show style event that could be held in a community park, or it could be held in a city facility a couple of times a year. So you could come and participate in multiple options for engagement in one space at one time, instead of having to go out, 2 nights this week, a night next week, 3 nights then. But that was so critical, is having something that people wanted to come to and participate. That's definitely still on the radar. I think will be incorporated into a hybrid model, and I think it would be really quite exciting to see that come to life for
Absolutely.
sure.
We're also seeing how much you like to hang out in parks. So if we can have every engagement, I
think about that, and I think about, honestly, that's where so many people spend so much time. And I think about through COVID too, parks were a space that we were all able to go, and we were able to go and spend time, not early days, but, later in COVID, we came together outside spaces. So critical. And there's so many parks in this community. Like, it is part of our neighborhood. It's part of our larger trail system.
When I first moved to the community, I was so impressed with the ownership and the pride and the use that public spaces got. It was definitely too hot in the south to spend that much time outdoors. But up here, it's just this ownership of it. And I always kind of ask myself, like, how does that happen? How does that get facilitated? Is it a homegrown swell of, support for these places? But I also see how the influence of the municipality can definitely foster that and really kind of make that ownership real.
Absolutely. And those are all such important pieces. And you see it in certain parks where communities create events in those parks, like the neighborhoods have events. So it's pretty incredible.
That's
really
awesome.
Truly is. Yeah.
If you could see the smile on Debbie's face as she talks about this as well, your viewers are definitely missing out for sure.
I do want to plant one little plug for the city with public engagement, and it's in 2019 we also won the IAP2, so the International Association for Public Participation Award for Organization of the Year. And that is kudos to all of the incredible work that the community has done, that staff have done, that council have done towards public engagement, towards the framework and the implementation plan. And it's just like, it was so incredible to be acknowledged by such a large organization and across the country. So it was just like, wow, this is incredible. So I always love to plug that where we can.
That is, it's definitely a point of pride. And because of the fastidiousness and the consistency and the work involved in the background, as we've kind of talked about through this podcast too, you can see how that really that has meaning. That award,
absolutely.
That's a really good track record, and it's been neat to see your involvement as well with other communities and such. And we always have this nice collaboration with so many other. You think that some may be in competition with you, so no, they're all just want to say, hey, how can we do this better? How are you doing that? Is it working for you? And there's been such an upswell of community collaboration around public engagement, which has opened doors to other conversations as well too, which is really neat to see.
Absolutely, and I think that's so important because we can all learn from each other. It's just, there's so many pieces. It's,
except from Toronto. I'm mandated to say that as a Kingston-based municipal partner. No, I'm joking, of course. Debbie, you're incredibly busy. You're running things. You're running public engagement and communications. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being really the best dam manager I've ever had. You've been an incredible person. And listeners, I've put off telling you this because I'm kind of in denial myself. But after more than 7 years of dedicated service to the City of Kingston, Debbi Miller's onto a new adventure. By the time this episode airs, she'll be in a new position in this county of Frontenac, and they are beyond fortunate to have you. I will go on record to say, my gosh, they hit a gold mine of so many amazing things. We've talked about it, about through your work in public engagement and so much more, but you've definitely left a mark on the City of Kingston. And it may not be known community-wide, but it's definitely recognized in the hallways of every city building. Every person that you've interacted with this corporation has valued that experience of working with you. I'm getting a little misty myself.
Like, whoa.
And so considering Debbi and I are getting a little bit misty with each other here, we just want to say thank you. And to definitely cheer up Paul, because Paul's getting a little misty here as well, and he's getting some tears on his laptop. For the first time ever, we're introducing a new segment in the end of Tell Me More, but we're just going to totally spring some questions on you. And they're called our rapid fire questions. So without thinking, your favorite song.
Oh my goodness.
Without thinking.
Just like,
Favorite song.
terrible.
It better be yours and your husband's song. Favorite song. We got nothing. We got nothing. We got favorite pastime.
Painting.
Painting. Okay, we got painting. Favorite spot to visit in Kingston. Oh gosh, this is a curveball. You have to pick one.
Oh my
You
goodness.
have to pick one.
The water. The water. Do I have to be specific about the location along the water?
Considering we're beating you up with this questions, no. We'll take water for an answer. Complete this sentence. Public engagement is...
I'm going to leave it with an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity for everybody to be involved in the community that we live in, that we work in, and that we play in. There's so many opportunities there with you, with everybody. And I just have to say thank you both, Rob and Paul. Like, it's been incredible working with you, and this has been a privilege to be able to do this podcast. I just kudos to this team. I'm going to try not to be emotional right now, but I just want to say thank you, and thank you to the city for the last few years and all that I've learned with public engagement and communications and everything else. So kudos. Get ready, County of Frontenac. Debbi Miller is coming. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Remember to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a topic for a future episode, tell us more. Tweet at City of Kingston using hashtag #TellMeMore, or send us an email at tellmemore@cityofkingston.ca. For more on this episode, visit cityofkingston.ca/podcasts. Tell Me More is produced by the City of Kingston's Communications and Customer Experience team.
Thanks for listening. Now, why not get involved? Get Involved Kingston is our online platform where you can share your ideas for making Kingston a better place to live, work, and play. Once you sign up, it's easy to follow and participate in engagement opportunities that will help shape projects, policies, and initiatives. Go to cityofkingston.ca and you can't miss it. Paul, are you involved?